So in this session, we're going to discuss ends and the role that they play in the strategic planning process. They are often confused with the goals or the strategic objectives, but they really deserve a space of their own. And we'll discuss why that confusion takes place and why it's important to have at least the content of ends placed somewhere a little bit later on. The ends are really the end of the phase one foundational work. They culminate this discernment that an organization has done on vision, mission, values, moral owners, and finally ends. The combination of those will serve as the main inputs for the plan development that follows. Some quick reminders. This process that we're going through in this course is based on the waterfall method. There are a number of valid processes through which an organization can take on strategic planning, and at Reach Our Goals, we utilize many of those with our clients. But for an organization that does not have an outside facilitator, it is the simplest, the most straightforward, the easiest one to grasp and undertake. The output of each stage of the process that we just saw in that flow really does serve as the input for the next phase. There is some concurrent work that should be explored, but it is really important to substantially conclude the work in one step before you enter the next one for a number of reasons, but especially without an outside facilitator, it allows for some concrete decisions to be made at each step where it's not going to be backtracking or creating issues in what was already decided. The other issue we have here is the determination of some of the strategic planning pieces before we actually have even defined where the big picture items are. This comes into play where we have organizations that, and it's a natural thing to do, want to hold on to the existing way things are done, and therefore they've already written part, and at least in their heads, written part of the strategic plan, either the goals or the actual operational components of the plan before the main strategy has even been decided on. So going one step to the next prevents that from happening. Now, it is also important that you are communicating with your stakeholders. If you're a membership organization, your members. If you're a constituency-based organization, your constituents. Be communicating with your donors as well. Get their input, earn their trust. There are places built in explicitly for this purpose during the strategic outreach components, as well as at the very beginning with input and analysis. But pretty much at the beginning of each major phase of the plan is a prime time to be sure that you're getting that input and communicating. So what are ends and goals? And we're going to talk about them both here because they are often confused with each other. And because where ends come from, that's often a piece that's left out of many strategic plans. So ends help us really define an organization's unique aim. It serves as the end of the theoretical aspects and kind of gives the last piece of it hones all the other pieces of the phase one together into a defined set of inputs for the goals that follow. Now, the goals are really the beginning of the practical aspects of strategic planning. They are time limited. They are, everybody's heard the acronym SMART. They are very tactical in nature. While the ends are the last piece of the strategy piece, the goals are the first piece of the tactical piece. So they're often confused with each other since they both serve as part of this transitional role between phases one and phases two. So just keep in mind they do serve very different purposes and they each deserve their own piece. Ends, they come from policy governance, so they're really applied, they can be applied in any form of strategic planning, and we'll talk about that shortly, but they are a special type of goal. They are the results for which the organization exists, and they're based in the viewpoint of the recipients or beneficiaries of those results, or moral owners as we've discussed them previously. And they attribute a value, a worth to those moral owners or groups. As I was saying earlier, they do originate from the policy governance model, but they can and should be utilized in many models of governance. They allow for a separation of roles between board and staff in terms of that transitional piece in the planning process. They establish a big picture missional direction that's grounded in the moral ownership. And we're going to look at that right here because this is where it applies. Your ends apply your mission to your moral owners in the direction of your vision based on your values. And that is something that only this component can do. It forces you to think in terms of your moral owners, what benefit you gain from your organization existing. And it's really important because the goals and other components that follow are going to focus on what your organization does, what your organization needs to do, and so on. This is the piece that ties everything together in the first phase and really looks at it in terms of your impact on your stakeholders, your impact on your moral owners. So if you get nothing else out of this session, apply your mission to your moral owners in the direction of your vision based on your values. Ends intentionally exclude what you do as well as how you do it. That comes later. This is much more strategic in thought process and much less tactical. They refer to the external world, never your organization. They are through the eyes of your moral owners. They focus on the beneficiaries of your work, not you. So here's some components or some keys to really developing meaningful ends. And we've already discussed how the ends really tie together all the other components of the first phase. So it would be useful to take your values, your vision, your mission, and your moral owners and put them on a piece of paper. And if you're going to do a board retreat or a board session on this, put it on a whiteboard or a flip chart or a series of flip chart papers so that everybody can be looking at that while you're doing the discernment process. If you have a video conference or a Zoom call or something of that nature, make sure that you can have a slide with all of these placed up so that people can see it while they're talking. This is a space in the process where it's really valuable to have that, ensure that everybody's looking at that and thinking about that as the discussion happens. Make sure that as you're pondering all these things, your focus is on your moral owners. And sometimes we do an exercise with clients where we have them just for a moment and not in a way that they can assume the totality of the role, but just for a moment imagine they're a moral owner and view the organization from that vantage point to help kind of break through any brain locks that may be happening as part of this process. But as you're doing that, define your impact. Now there's two different theories on ends, and I will say this: if you're doing policy governance, it's defined. There's no theories on it. But if you're going to use this piece in any other format, you got a couple of options. There's a visionary component that really revolves around the end result in the eyes of the moral owners. It's that formula we went through earlier in the slideshow, where you're applying your mission to the benefit of your moral owners, aimed at your vision, in the direction of your vision, grounded in your values. It's great for organizations that either have a weak or a new organizational culture, or where they're trying to transition cultures, where there are staff available to fill in some gaps, and it really helps bridge those kinds of organizations. There's also a very practical, honed-in way which revolves around the measurability of results. It's that formula we discussed, but it also has numbers filled in terms of cost or relative cost. It's good for organizations that have a very clear and defined organizational culture, that perhaps don't have staff, that are doing this as board work in and of itself, or are just getting started and really need that extra guidance placed in that piece. So some best practices, some important things to consider is stay focused on the change you want to make in the world. It is tempting as we're entering phase 2 or be ready to enter phase 2 to be thinking about the what and the how you're doing the work. Don't fall into that trap. That's one of the most common things that people do, is be thinking about ahead and trying to grasp what you want the answers to be in terms of implementation. Here, your sole job, and it's the one place you actually have to do this, is to view your organization from the eyes of your moral owners to develop these ends. If you struggle, start with the sentence, because of our organization's work, this moral owner is, has, are able to, whatever, and then what you want that to be, what you want that end to be. Fill in that gap. And then just delete the beginning, because of our organization's work. And then you have a sentence that reads, this moral owner group is, has, etc. And then what is it? And when you have those, or a series of those, you can really kind of mesh them together, look at them, explore them, and that'll help develop that's one way of developing models of ends. Stay away from the what and how of your work. We just talked about that. And another key thing that I also find many organizations aren't comfortable with, make sure you're including the work you're doing in collaboration. So often we want to measure our organization's work on its standalone efforts. If your organization is doing good work in an accountable fashion, nearly all of your efforts are going to involve collaboration at some level. If not, you may have a challenge actually achieving your mission or accomplishing many of the goals that are going to be developed because you're isolated. Very few organizations are healthy. In fact, I can't think of a single example of a healthy organization that doesn't work with partners to accomplish their goals. It really is a sign of organizational health and vitality when much of the work you're doing is in collaboration, utilizing each other's strengths. So here's some examples of what an organizational end statements might look like. Our college exists so that people in our region have opportunities to improve their lives and communities. And you see that I've color-coded many of the components here for easy recognition and pulling out the components here. So in the green highlight, you'll see the moral owner listed. So people in our region. The next one is students. The last one is members. In the fuchsia, you'll see what the organization's contribution to that moral owner is. And in the blue, you'll see the transitional verb. The is, has, becomes, have, etc. So our college exists so that people in our region have opportunities to improve their lives and communities. Our school exists so that students become informed, contributing, fulfilled members of society. Our credit union exists so that members have the knowledge and ability to be in control of their financial lives. We have a moral owner, we have what they end up with, and the transitional verb. Now you're going to see I put a little gearhead next to the word become, and the other verbs in there are have, they're stated in the present, they're stated with strong language, what that end is. This one is different, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about why that might be the case. Why is become a future-looking verb, whereas the other ones on the screen are present? Well, if you look at it, the organization in this case is a school. The end involves being informed, contributing, fulfilled members of society. So that's going to be something that is actually achieved well after the moral owner is within their relationship. So especially if you're looking at perhaps a K through 6 school, an elementary school, something of that nature, you're going to be laying the groundwork for something that is not present while they're still a moral owner of your organization. So our voluntary agency exists so that individuals with disabilities in our service area will live secure, engaged, independent lives. Our health organization exists so that there are optimal health outcomes for people in our service area. Now you'll notice I actually made a mistake in this slide on the first bullet. And again, I'm going to give you a second to think about what highlighting change should actually be made. Okay, if you look at it, there is a caveat to the individuals with disabilities. The moral owner is not, are not all individuals with disabilities. The moral owner is individuals with disabilities in our service area. That's their moral owner. So in reality, individuals with disabilities in our service area should all be highlighted green. Now here's a couple of other examples of future-looking pieces, and you'll find this with trade associations, regulatory organizations, organizations that exist in a continual role. They'll use similar forward-looking language a lot of the time. These cases, I'm not always a fan of that. I think trade associations and professional regulatory organizations, they're going to have the same moral owners during the realization of this. I think the idea is that they're focusing on it in terms of sustaining existing work. In many cases, including one of the clients we worked with before, we got them out of that because they were stagnant. They weren't actually developing any new programs or any new visions for where they could grow the association, and they were stuck on the conditions that they felt they had already achieved. So when you see forward-looking words, make sure the organization is one like a school where legitimately it's a forward-looking verb. But you'll see that again, will be is in the future tense here. Our trade association exists so that there will be conditions that promote member profitability in our industry. Our professional regulatory organization exists so that there will be competent ethical practice of our profession for people of our province, state. So, important notes. If you're attempting to follow policy governance, you need to add the costs to the ends. It doesn't have to be a literal dollar amount. It can be relational to the organizational resources. Most organizations, unless they're very large, very well staffed, and very well funded, aren't going to be a pure policy governance organization. It's generally not healthy unless you have the funds and the staff to implement a policy governance structure. But if you do, just know, and I don't want to be lying to you here, just know you actually have to add those components to it. So at the end of your ends, you will have a few concise statements about the impact your organization has in the world. You're going to have a starting point to develop strategic goals, outreach plans, and operational priorities. And you're going to have the most precise set of statements of your value to the world that doesn't mention what you do or how you do it. It's a very powerful tool. It, kind of like your vision, is a North Star at which you can align all of your strategic work from the development of the plan through implementation. It's one of the gut checks that you do when you're looking at both operational decisions from a staff standpoint as well as strategic decisions from a board standpoint. So I hope that makes sense, and feel free to comment or message us if you have any questions or problems with this material. But that's the role of ends in the strategic planning process.